Today we're here with Mr. Andy Thomas of truthagenda.org. And we're really going to be talking about some cool subjects today, crop circles. He's written a ton of really great books, Conspiracies, Truth Agenda, as well as Introduction to Crop Circles, A Oneness of Mind, as well as Swirled Harvest and Vital Signs, Quest for Contact, which is really interesting. Looks like a really interesting book there, Quest for Contact. Fields of Mystery and local history books that he's written on his website. Really cool stuff over at truthagenda.org. So it's an honor to have you on today, Mr. Andy Thomas. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Good evening.
Yeah. So how did you, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but you've been at this for about 20 years, right?
25 years, in fact, this year, 25 years.
Fascinating. And so this is what you do full-time? You're a full-time author, writer, researcher, and all that kind of stuff?
I suppose it depends what you mean. I mean, I work as well. I work in publishing. And I think when you've got a passion, though, it does become your life at the same time. So I try to put all the things that I do together and hope that out of it comes some useful whole that will be, useful to other people.
So what happened early on? You've been at this, you said, for 25 years. Prior to that, were you just always a seeker, always kind of looking at different things and looking deeper into what the sort of mainstream media has told us about stuff?
I think I needed a trigger. Yes, I was always questioning, things I heard, and I'd always thought a little bit differently. But I did sort of need that extra push. And the push for me was seeing crop circles back in 1991. And I had heard about them like anybody else. And living here in Britain, we get so many crop circles. But I actually saw them for myself in the summer of 1991, and I was just astonished at how many there were, how big they were. Just, I was standing there and every horizon I looked at had another crop formation on it. And I just needed to know more immediately. And I decided I would try to find out who was researching these things. And indeed I did. And I joined what was back then called the Centre for Crop Circle Studies. And wound up forming a branch here in the part of England that I live, which is a county called Sussex. So we then started to, keep sort of a check on our own crop circles, and we started to hold regular meeting. And from that, somehow, I started to write about them. I started to give lectures about crop circles. And most of all, I realized very quickly that whatever anybody's view on crop circles, and I am aware it is controversial, the media was not telling the truth about them. And you could prove that if you knew what was really going on. The very poor reporting that was going on woke me up to realize that we're just not told the truth of anything, really. Right. Not in the mainstream media. And it was crop circles definitely that made me aware of that. And then before you know it, you meet other people researching other areas, from UFOs to psychic phenomena to conspiracies. And here I am now, 25 years later, still trying to encapsulate all of that and trying to show people that the version of the world that they're given in the mainstream media is just that. It's a version. It's not necessarily anything like the truth. And that's what I try to get conversations going about.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, some of the things that they say in terms of crop circles, they say, some of the standard, official stories are, wind patterns, and there's things like wild boars running through and animals messing up these formations. And it's got to make you laugh, right? I mean, how would an animal be able to create these crop circles like that? It makes no sense.
Well, I think part of the problem is the people that think it might be animals, they've often never actually looked at what's appearing. You hear that term crop circle and you imagine a single circle in the field. But of course, anybody who's been following them, they know that they've become these incredible, spectacular geometric shapes. And you've only got to look at a few to know it's definitely not animals.
Yeah.
In terms of is it people, which is, of course, the thing that's usually thrown out there. Yes, some are made by people. I think that's accepted. but you really cannot explain the whole phenomenon that way. That became very quickly clear when, I and the other people I began working with started to really look into this. And here we are, and 25 years on, we're still talking about crop circles. They're not all explained. The mystery still continues on. And I think that says a lot. So whatever it is that really is making them, it's not straightforward. And it certainly deserves more attention and more respect than it gets. And it would be nice if people were more open-minded towards them. But you do need to see the evidence. Having an opinion doesn't mean anything if you haven't got any evidence. And I'm afraid lots of people do have opinions based on not very much. When you see the evidence, you realize, okay, there's a case to be made here that we need better explanations.
Right, that makes sense. Wasn't there a guy named John Wade or something that he attempted some years back to create a crop circle out there in England? He tried his best, but there were some anomalies, and it didn't really work out that well, right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the name you give there, I think you've sort of compounded two people there.
Oh.
There's been a number. First of all, I mean, there's been a number of people who've obviously said they've made them. The first people we had to deal with were two retired gentlemen who called themselves Doug and Dave. And they said they'd made them all, except the ones they made for television cameras were just so obviously very poor, really a joke. They were not responsible for making them. That was clear, or not very many of them. Other people have come forward. I think the person you might mean is a man called John Lundberg, who has worked with other people and made various crop circles for television programs. There was another guy called Jim Schnabel. So there have been people who've tried to show, well, it could all be a hoax, but you compare what they make with the, shall we say, the more unexplained ones, and really they cannot explain them all. Now, John Wabe was a character who claimed to have videoed a crop circle forming back in 1996, and that's still very controversial. There is a video of a crop circle suddenly appearing beneath these flying lights, and it certainly shows what many people claim they've seen over the years. But of course, some say, well, he faked it. He worked for a video company. It was a hoax. But there are many claims and counterclaims around that story. And the truth of it is, we still don't know to this day whether it was a real piece of film that then got debunked because somebody felt it was getting too close to the bone, or whether it's just an extremely good fake that some people are still taken in by. We actually don't know the truth of that video. But I certainly think that there's more to that than meets the eye. And the fact that there's never been a more convincing video of a crop circle forming that's come since says to me, well, it can't be that easy to fake. There are various special effects videos people have tried to make since, but they look like special effects, whereas the video in question still looks, in a way, very authentic. And if it was a fake, it was an extremely good one. But the fact that people are still arguing over it, even to this day, tells me that it's really not clear-cut, and we don't know the answer to that at all.
Yeah, it's bizarre, right? Because he came out, I guess, under scrutiny and said that that it was, in fact, he actually put it all together, and it was a fake. But then, people have tried to replicate that, through video software and have still had a difficult time, coming up with the same sort of really good footage. And so that's what makes people think, well, maybe he was, I don't know, paid off, or maybe something happened where he was forced to say that it was fake, even though it wasn't. And then people tried to recreate his video with, even more modern software, and it still doesn't come out that well. But I mean, either way you slice it, people do talk about this idea of those strange little orbs, right? That some people think are actually creating the crop circles.
Well, I mean, the lights are very definitely there, and I've seen them for myself over a field with crop circles in it, and that was back in 1993. If you go online, you'll find many videos showing you these lights flying in and around crop circles, and they are there. That's beyond question. I suppose the point becomes, what are they? Because if you look at the way these lights move, they sort of fly in and around the crop circles. almost as if they know what they're doing. To some minds, of course, they believe they are intelligently controlled. But then, we do have phenomena such as ball lightning, which is a rare but known weather phenomenon, which is quite similar. But whichever way you look at it, you've got these lights. They're not explained away by just saying, well, all of these shapes are made by men with bits of wood, because how does that explain the lights? So, it's another aspect that, again, needs more research, but it really is there. And so many people have seen them and videoed them over the years, often with many people present, where there's no chance that it was faked. That's when you realize, it's another interesting layer to all the many strange things that go on in and around crop circles.
Yeah, it is, because, there is, like you said, the ball lightning, and that is a phenomenon. But although there seems to be so many crop circles, at least in your area of the world, usually from April to September or something like that, but I mean, there can't be that much ball lightning going on where in your area, during that time to explain all this, right?
No, I mean, you wouldn't have thought so. I mean, we do get crop circles in the winter seasons and going into the late autumn. So, it can happen out of those times. But yeah, I mean, certainly, we don't tend to get that many thunderstorms in Britain compared to, say, a very hot country. So if it is ball lightning, it's really hard to explain what it's doing flying around.
Whoops, Andy, are you still there? Hello? Looks like we got disconnected here. Let's see if we can get Andy back. Internet connection problem. All right, let's see if we can get him back. There's a problem with the internet connection. Okay, Andy is offline. Trying to get the call back here. Let's see here. Strange. Either way you slice this thing, crop circles are a bizarre phenomenon. And I'm going to ask him when we get back what his theories are, because I want to just kind of get to the chase here and see what he thinks about where these things are coming from. It doesn't seem to me like they can be explained. I mean, perhaps there's people doing it, but man, it would have to be a concerted effort. It would have to be some sort of team or government agency, or if it's purely human, which is totally possible. It would take a concerted effort. And, one of the things that people do say is that the crop circles tend to be near roads that are easily accessible. And so, that would kind of lend people to believe or to think that people drive out there in cars and create the crop circles. So, it's if they're created by aliens or some other kind of being, it would make sense that they would be in areas that are completely inaccessible. But either way you slice it, it doesn't seem like humans can do this either. So let me try Andy one more time. And let's see here. It just seems very bizarre, doesn't it? This whole crop circle thing. Wondering what you guys think. Do you think that they are man-made? If they're not man-made, what are your thoughts about where they're coming from? Does it make you think there's such a thing as aliens or UFOs or something that's creating this? And why wouldn't our government or any government really try to explain this stuff? Let's see. We're going to try to get him back here. All right. Let's see. Having some problems here. All right. Can you hold on? Okay, they're going to try to get the call back. So it's such a bizarre thing, and it happens to be near sacred sites too. And I'm wondering why they are they tend to be near sacred sites and tend to predominantly be near or in England, which is really weird. I mean, there's a lot of cornfields here in America where you would think that this would be a phenomenon as well. Maybe the people that create the crop circles are English. Who knows? Let's see. Let's see if I can get him back here. Let me write him a message. Okay, before we were so rudely cut off by our friends at Skype, we're talking a little bit about that ball lightning, and I think I was saying that that it doesn't make so much sense that ball lightning would be able to account for so many crop circles. How many circles do they typically find in sort of the high season of crop circles, I guess?
I mean, the numbers of crop circles can vary a lot from year to year. I mean, on average, if you look at the global tally, it's about 150 or so a year, of which probably at least a third to a half are here in England. So, there's no question that we are the main hotspot of the world, but other countries do get them. Germany gets quite a lot. Italy is probably, as near to England in terms of the numbers as any other country. So, it is a global phenomenon, but for some reason, and this is much debated, we do get an awful lot here. And I mean, over in America, for instance, you have had crop circles, but for some reason they're just so rare. I mean, back in sort of the mid 1990s, there were more, but at the moment, I mean, you're lucky if you get one or two formations a year. So obviously, for those that think that there is an intelligence behind this, they have to try to explain why they don't want to talk to you much over there, which is something which is, it raises many questions. But I think also there are geological factors coming into play. If you look at where most of the British crop circles have appeared, you'll see that many of them are appearing, and I would say the majority of them are appearing in conjunction with underground water. What are known as the aquifers. And that's any rock that holds lots of water. And there's no question there's a correlation between where the crop formations appear and where the water is. Now, I'm not saying, therefore, it's all a natural effect because, clearly some of those formations, they look very symbolic. Some are actual pictures. But there may be, a geophysical connection, that whatever other process is involved, there might be something in the ground that is helping to determine where these things appear. And we know, for instance, that underground water can generate all kinds of electrical effects. So it might be that, therefore, some countries are just more conducive to whatever it is that's creating crop circles than others, and that for some reason there's something here in Britain, and I say Britain, I mean England specifically, that is attracting many of them or generating many of them. And it's certainly something which, many people have thought about over the years, but coming to a firm conclusion, as with all of the crop circle stuff, it is very difficult.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk, especially with sacred sites like pyramids and things like that, of aquifers being underneath the ground and people thinking that the electricity is created from the flow of movement of the water, and then somehow it gets sort of transmuted into these structures like the pyramids and all that. But it's really interesting. Like I think there was like in the 1600s, there was some sort of person making a reference to a circular formation in some crops, but it doesn't seem until the recent times, right, that people have been noticing them. And what's up with that? But with this big, amount of time with a gap there.
Well, we are now beginning to believe that actually they were noticed more than we have thought. I think the illustration you're referring to is from 1678. And it's an illustration from a pamphlet that was published in that year, and it was called The Mowing Devil. And it describes how a farmer had these strange circles appearing on his land. And what it shows and what it describes, well, we would say that's crop circle. But around that same decade, there is a book called The Natural History of Staffordshire, which is a county in England. And Sir Robert Plot, who wrote that book, he describes clearly crop circles. He even draws diagrams of things that he thought might be making them. And he thought it was weather related. So there are more early accounts than we might think, probably 200, 300. And there's been some very good work done by a number of people, particularly a chap called Terry Wilson, who's put this into an ebook that you can find online, just listing all the many old accounts of crop circles. There's a Victorian account, for instance, of a gentleman actually watching a crop circle appear in front of his eyes within seconds, which still happens today. And I mean, I've met many people who say they grew up in the 1930s and the 1940s, and they all remember crop circles. And the earliest photograph that we've got is 1932, and we've got clear evidence from all decades since. So, yes, I think we can clearly say this has been going on in some form or another for a very long time. But it's around the 1970s when you begin to see more sort of real interest grow. I think until that point, when they were just more or less circles or rings, it was sort of treated as a little countryside mystery, not much really to wonder about. But then you hit the 1970s and the numbers start to go up. And as you get into the 1980s, the shapes themselves are beginning to evolve. And then when you get to 1990, there's this massive leap forward, and you get the first of the very hieroglyphic looking formations. And that's when the media furore begins, and that's when the evolution that's still going on today really gets going. So, there is one view that there is a natural force that can make simple patterns, but that something else has come along and learned to use that to create more complexity. And what that something is, whether it's extraterrestrial consciousness, our consciousness, because there's been a lot of psychic interaction experiments over the years, or something else altogether, we don't know. But it may well be we have something here that's operating on many layers, and maybe some crop circles are natural, and others have a mind behind them, but it's using a basic mechanism that is available in nature. And I think there's something to that idea.
Mm-hmm. So if I were to ask you $1 million question and you had to guess, what would your guess be, do you think? What do you think is really going on?
Well, I mean, I've always said I don't know what's going on, because that's the honest answer. If I had a hunch, I think it's going to be a combination of theories, because you can't really come up with a definite explanation, but you can make observations. And one is that these things appear to demonstrate consciousness sometimes. Others are geometric shapes that could occur naturally. You've got the water connection, you've got strange light seen around them, but you've also got some formations which have been, very clearly symbolic. We've had star alignment shown to us. We've had the famous the alien and the disk formation, where the disk is in a binary form, which actually gives you a message in words. And that was back in 2002. So clearly, that's not made by the weather. That's not a natural force. Whether it's all the same thing or several different sources using this mechanism for their own ends, you see, that's, I think, one of the big questions. And I think that it's not straightforward. It's not this or it's that. It's going to be a lot of things melding together in the middle. And I think until we can begin to see exactly where those bits fit, we're not going to get closer to an answer here. But maybe that's not even the point. I mean, for those people that believe these things are here to help deepen our consciousness, it's the very sort of unknown quality to them that, of course, keeps us asking the questions, keeps drawing us in. Whereas if we knew exactly what they meant, we wouldn't need to do that, and then we wouldn't evolve our minds so much. So it may well be that the mystery is a part of this and was always intended to be so, or at least for those that, are clearly displaying consciousness of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it fun to live in the mystery? Because I used to come from a world where everything was figured out. There was answers for everything. Qualified people could tell you why things the way they were the way they were. And but to me, now I just love to live in sort of this mysterious, just sort of not knowing, being in flux, and just allowing for possibility and allowing for change, allowing for this kind of stuff. Isn't it more fun to live like that?
Yeah, I think you have to embrace the mystery. If you want to get on with crop circles, there's no point trying to be deterministic about it. The people that have tried that have never got anywhere in the long run. I mean, they've come up with theories which may or may not be right, but I think some of the earlier researchers especially came in with a definite view it was going to be this or it was going to be that.
Uh-huh.
And then when they couldn't prove that, I think they got very disillusioned and we had then a lot of infighting. So the ones that have just stood back and said, okay, it is a weird mystery. Let's just allow it to be that and we'll see where it goes and see what happens. And then allow, individual questioning to begin from that journey, just a journey of the unknown. I think those people have come off better on the whole. And yes, it is fun. And I think it is fun to have something that doesn't give you all the answers on a plate. And it's also more than fun. I think that's where the real stimulation comes in. And I think we should be grateful for that. They've been a gift because they've set so many people onto journeys they would never have gone on without the crop circles. And that's certainly true for me and the other work that I've gone into over the years, just as a result of the journey that began with the circles for me.
Mm-hmm. What was I going to say? Oh, what is the name of that circle that you talked about with the mathematics? I remember hearing about that, and there was some sort of it was like there was, like you said, a binary deal, and the crop circle appeared to answer some previous question or something.
Well, okay, we're looking at two different sort of years there. So in 2001, next to a radio telescope at a place called Chilbolton in England. And next to that, we had a humanoid face made out of dots. Very clever. And when you blurred it, you get this very three-dimensional face next to a binary code that was a slightly altered version of the famous SETI signal that was beamed out into space in 1974, telling any hypothetical intelligence what life on Earth was like. Our DNA, our chemical elements, that kind of thing. What we had in the field was slightly different. It changed the DNA, which effectively described another creature. It added silicon into the table of elements. It seemed to show a different planet. It seemed to show a different life form, almost as if it was a reply to our message. Now, some said, well, hang on, our message can't even have got out there that far into space yet. But of course, then the other argument to that is, yeah, but they are here already knowing exactly what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they're playing with us. But then a year after that, in 2002, we had a formation that was unambiguously a picture of a classic ET type grey alien holding a disk of another binary code. And when you decoded that, it gives you the message, and I'll read it, which is, from memory, it's beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe there is good out there, and we oppose deception. And then it ended by saying conduit closing. So that was a very powerful message, and it's still debated to this day, and it's never been repeated. And there's never been another crop circle with an actual message in it since. So this makes some people wonder, and certainly as the years go by and the deceptions get revealed, particularly, from governments around the world, you do begin to wonder if there isn't a lot of wisdom to that. And it's almost as if whatever made that thought, that's all you need. You don't need another message until you can understand why that is so important. We're not going to give you another one. So it's been back to pictures, back to, ambiguous crop circles ever since. So they were, two very special years for the crop formations.
Mm-hmm. How many new sightings do you tend to see per year? Did you say that already?
Well, I mean, as I say, it varies. I mean, over the years, we've had some years where there's been several hundred in a year around the world. Other years where there's 150 or so, and the numbers can go up and down from year to year, of which many are in England, as I think we said. Mm-hmm. But it does vary, and each year you get a scare story come out, it would seem now in the newspaper saying, crop circles are finished, they don't happen anymore, we don't need to think about them. It's never true. There have been some years where there have been less crop circles, but often they say that. And then if you actually look at the amount of reports, there have been almost as many as any other year. So, it's still going on. It's very persistent. And I think that's the thing. The crop circles don't go away. The media attention may. And there's clear media disinformation about crop circles, but the actual phenomenon just keeps on persisting, doing what it does. And I quite like that. There's something quite dogged about it. Just keeps on going and keeps on drawing more people in and taking them on the journey that so many other people like myself have been on.
What are your thoughts about the energetics? A lot of people talk about, some people have done Gauss meters and different sort of EMF detection devices there at the areas where the crop circles are. What are your thoughts about the energy that happens at these places?
I mean, you often hear people talking about energy in crop circles, and they can feel it and it's running through them. There may be different kinds of energies, and there have been scientific attempts to find out what that might be. Back in 1992, so really quite a few years ago now, there was a project called Project Argus, and some of the more scientific minds from the Centre for Crop Circle Studies, and often, they had real qualifications, did a lot of tests in a number of crop formations, and they concluded that the one thing they did keep finding anomalies with was electromagnetism. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show there are many anomalies with that, and people have gone into crop circles with electrostatic meters and all kinds of things over the years, and have certainly got strange readings which are quite hard to explain. Now, I mean, from a scientific point of view, the only thing is, unless you knew what the reading was in a certain spot before the crop circle appeared, it's hard to compare. But you can still stand in a crop circle, get a reading, then walk just a few feet outside of it and see that, there is a definite change in that reading. So I think there is definitely something to this. Dowsers, using the old arts of rods and pendulums, they claim they can detect underground water and energy fields and ley lines and all of this. Well, they absolutely say they can detect these energies, and a lot of people take that very seriously, and there's been a lot of work done with that over the years. So many people go into crop circles and they get affected, and they come out and they will describe health effects, some good. There's tales of miracle cures occurring inside crop circles, whereas others are bad. And some people have come out and been really ill. And I mean, even if you say some of that's in the mind, or it's even pesticide allergy, you can't explain all of it that way. And I think clearly there's something to it. There's more than just inert shapes here. They do seem to do something. And many people have reported, energetic effects on them over the years. And animals as well do seem to behave strangely in and around them, as if they're picking something up. Mm-hmm. And all of that may also be connected with the underground water and the electrical currents from that. So again, it's probably very multi-layered. There's a lot of causal effects coming into play here.
Is there any connection between, I was sort of surmising when you got cut off there at the end, it seems as though a lot of the crop circles are sort of in areas where the road, it's accessible by road. As far as I understand, there's not a whole lot of crop circles that are completely sort of disassociated from contact out in the middle of nowhere. Is that true, first of all?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you've got a country like England, we're a small country, really. So there's nowhere that's ever going to be that isolated. But I can think of a few crop circles which did not get spotted at the time. I can think of one that was in a field completely surrounded by trees that in the end got picked up by accident just by somebody flying over it. You would never have seen it from the ground.
Wow.
So you do get stuff like that. There have been glyphs. I mean, I remember some, and they were somewhere up in the Siberian tundra or something, literally just cut into these little peat bogs, and they'd filled up with water. Now, What were they? Were they crop circles? Was there something different? I don't know. As far as I'm aware, nobody ever visited them. They just got spotted from the air.
Hmm.
So you do sometimes get glyphs that, really nobody ever seems to have gone into them, but they do tend to be the ones in the more remote areas. I mean, certainly here, and particularly in the county of Wiltshire, in England, where so many appear. There's people flying every day looking for them, and even in some of the more remote areas, you're never going to be that far from civilization,
Hmm.
and people will spot them and they'll go and find them. But that said, certainly there are some that are, when you're on the ground, they're really hard to find,
Hmm.
and you can fly over them and then get in your car and still not be able to work out where they are on the ground. It can be very difficult sometimes. But yeah, there are certainly some cases of isolated ones. But then if you conclude there is an intelligence behind at least some of these, then it's going to make sense they're going to put them into accessible places. There's no point doing them and then hiding them away. So, that's the other way of looking at that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because if there are, let's say there's people that are creating these things, then you're right. They would sort of want to, use it as a way for other people to find them. Because if you create it in such a way where no one can find them, then it obviously doesn't serve a purpose to create it in the first place. Are there any crop circles in areas of the world that has ever surprised you?
Well, there are, I think, very few countries that have never had any crop circles at all. We hear rumors of some in India, for instance, and Africa occasionally, but they don't seem to get very many. And sometimes they don't, of course, seem to have the same kind of crops that we would grow here. But we've had some in, for instance, Indonesia, in paddy fields, which are full of water. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting one. And certainly, you can go down to Brazil and Argentina and the South American countries, and they're certainly getting more crop circles there these days. So you can sometimes get a country that, might not have had much, and then suddenly it seems to open up, and it's almost as if, the very fact that people start thinking about them, it starts to generate more. And a skeptic would say, well, that's the people going out and making them because they know people are interested. But I don't know, because I think there is a psychic interaction level to this. Now, I was involved in some experiments back in the early to mid 1990s using the power of the mind, just to see if we could interact with crop circles, and we use psychics and channelers just to see if we could work out maybe where they might appear and try and be there when they appeared. Now, that never worked, but what did work was trying to influence the creation of certain shapes. So a very small group of us would choose a shape that we wanted to appear, and lo and behold, on at least one occasion, exactly that shape then did appear. And that's beyond all coincidence and chance. And nobody outside of our small group knew what shape had been chosen. And other groups have done similar work. We're not the only people who have done that. So that kind of work makes me think that there is a mind connection. Our consciousness is in some way connecting with whatever else is going on there. And, there's certainly something to that. When you look at the Global Consciousness Project, you've got now experiments absolutely showing that computers even can be affected by the power of the mind with no physical connection between the two. Especially focused collective thought can actually create readings that are beyond random. And there's a lot of very good work going on around the world today with this, which suggests that what we all collectively think is affecting and changing the world around us. And of course, the implications of that are huge. But it does mean that the idea that we might be interacting with these shapes appearing in the fields and maybe subconsciously influencing them to appear is really not impossible. And it's certainly something that should be considered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's so bizarre about the shapes is that they're so intricate, and like the sacred geometry and all this bizarre ratios that's going on with the circles in relation to each other, their size themselves, and the amount of circles that sort of flare off, on each sort of little spiral. That's just so bizarre, isn't it? Isn't that the weirdest thing? I mean, if it's people that are creating these things, let's say it's people. If it's people who are creating these things, they must know a lot about, at the very least, sacred geometry, right?
Well, yeah, this is one of the arguments. If they're all made by people, we're dealing with people on a level of genius here
Uh-huh.
who've never yet demonstrated their craft in front of a camera and obviously have got some very serious agenda because you don't keep this going just for a joke every year. So, yeah, for all the ones we know are man made, some of them are reasonable, they've got better, and yet you compare the ones we've seen made as demonstrations, which, by the way, often take many hours to make, sometimes 6 to 9 hours to make a man made formation. Well, you can then compare them to others which have appeared in very short periods of time, often in daylight, often in full view of roads. Famous one at Stonehenge in 1996, for instance, appeared within 45 minutes. And you've got other occasions where we know when a field was empty, we know when the formation appeared, and you just say, well, when you look at how long it's taking people to make theirs, there's simply no way these things could have been man-made. So these are things worth consideration. I mean, if you take a nighttime, now, some of these formations are in fields next to roads or near roads. You
Uh-huh.
can see into the fields. You've barely got 5 hours of true darkness in which to work in the middle of the night. And yet, if they're taking 6 to 9 hours to make them, in theory, you should drive past these fields in the morning. You could wave at the people still working away there, making them, because they should be in there. But this very, very rarely seems to happen. And it's things like this that really make you think. And sometimes on a single night, you can have several major crop formations, sometimes in an identical style, when even one of them would be more than a night's work, based on the evidence we've seen from the human circle makers themselves. So, yes, some are man-made, but there are many you just cannot explain that way. And the ones that appear in daylight in these very short windows of time, really, that makes you think differently. And then you talk to the eyewitnesses, and I've spoken to a few over the years, and they are very consistent. They describe these things coming out of nowhere in otherwise calm conditions, spinning the plants down very rapidly, usually within 10 seconds. And you just realize, okay, something quite profound has happened to these people, and they're just telling the truth as they remember it. So from that alone, we know there is a real phenomenon. And it's very irritating when you hear the media just dismiss it all because they're clearly not aware of this evidence or can't be bothered to look it up. And I think that's a great shame.
Does the media in England report it at all? Because we don't hear about it at all. I mean, in fact, I shouldn't say that because I don't really watch the news anymore, but I never heard about the crop circles at all until the internet came out, and and I started looking at things, and people are taking photographs and doing doing YouTube videos and things. But is it on the news at all in England?
Well, I mean, the thing is, when crop circles first got very big and hieroglyphic in 1990, that's when there was a sudden rush of media attention, and they were interested for a few years after that. And we had, like every year, one of our big newspapers, the Daily Mail, would run at least a double-page spread of photographs, even if they weren't commenting on where they came from. Many other papers would show some occasionally, usually, quite cynical, making the assumption they're man-made. But even that's gone now. Very, very occasionally you might hear crop circles mentioned in the press, but no, they've either got bored or they've been told to stay away from the story. There's virtually a news blackout now about it, unless it can be used to make fun of crop circle researchers or say something rude about them. No, they're not interested, even though the phenomenon is still going and we're getting pretty extraordinary stuff. So where you are, out in the States, where you have so few crop circles, I suppose there's even less chance now that you're going to hear about it. I would say the American sort of peak of publicity would have been when the Signs movie came out with Mel Gibson.
Uh-huh.
And if anybody remembers that, this kind of horror movie about crop circles or with crop circles in it, there was a sudden flurry of attention around crop circles then. But that's pretty much it. And I think it's pretty much gone downhill since then. And I do think the lack of media attention really has to make you wonder. And by the way, it isn't just crop circles. The lack of media attention for things like UFOs and the endless debunking stories they run, and the lack of media attention on, conspiracy theories believed very widely by many people, the fact they don't talk about them actually tells you something quite strong, which is that they clearly don't want anybody talking about them. Because otherwise you'd think surely they'd be happy to fill a bit of a newspaper with this. So it's what's not reported in the news that often tells you as much as what is reported. And yeah, I think you can read something into that, because it's pretty clear there are certain areas they don't want to be discussing. They don't want us to be discussing it.
Do you think there's any government connection to crop circles? I mean, there's obviously some sort of connection between crop circles and media, because the media either chooses to report crop circles or they report crop circles in a very specific way, like you were just talking about. But I wonder, have you had any, in all your research, have you had any information in terms of any connection at all with government and crop circles?
Well, there are various claims. Now, I mean, we do know that the government has carried out a few tests over the years. I think in the late 1980s, we know the Ministry of Defense looked into it and concluded they were not all man-made. And in 1995, the Ministry of Agriculture over here ran soil tests on 19 different formations, and I was actually involved with taking some of the samples for those soil tests. And they, in fact, did conclude there was an imbalance in the nitrogen and nitrate ratios in the soil beneath the crop circles, which was quite something. And then they said no more. I wouldn't say anything more about it. Now, there are various claims that there are governments looking into them, and, there's conspiracies and all of this. It's hard to be sure. The military do seem to photograph them. They keep a tab on them, especially in Wiltshire. But then the military are very busy there anyway, because they've got a lot of their bases, so they're going to be flying around there. In terms of the government sort of deliberately issuing orders to the media not to cover them, there have been claims of this. There have been claims of D-notices, which over here means that's when the media are ordered not to report something. The evidence for that is less clear, but it wouldn't surprise me if it has happened at some point. And we mentioned earlier on Doug and Dave. Now, they were the first two elderly gentlemen to claim they'd made crop circles. And it's pretty obvious that they were not responsible for what they were claiming. But there were interesting things behind their story, because the press agency that put their story out was the mysterious MBF Services. And a researcher called George Wingfield tried to track down that press agency and discovered it didn't exist. And in fact, the only sort of phone number anybody ever gleaned from the press connected with this supposed press agency, it turned out to be a company with connections to MI5, which is kind of our version of the CIA or the FBI over here.
Right.
So it does look like there might well have been some intelligence services background to some of the debunking stories we've had. And there's other claims in the years since that, there is coordinated debunking that may well go back to governments. But proving that is another matter. But certainly there are some suspicious areas, to be sure.
Yeah, those guys claimed, I think, didn't they claim to have been making crop circles for like 13 years or something?
Well, that's right, which immediately tells you they're not telling the truth, because crop circles go far further back than that, as we discovered earlier on in this conversation. I mean, the other claim is, well, governments actually make the crop circles. I mean, there's quite a lot of people that think, well, maybe the military are making them for some weird test of some device, or it's a double bluff. They're trying to make us think aliens are coming and then debunking it as part of some weird psyops thing. I'll tell you why I don't really go down that view, though, is that there's something about the shapes that doesn't feel military to me. I mean, if they are testing secret devices, why not test them secretly? Why do it so publicly? So I'm not sure about that. If it is the double bluff theory, I don't know. It seems to me they've done rather too well in debunking them, so why bother keep making them? So Yes, these are theories, but they're only theories. And I think that's the thing. We come back again to standing in the middle and just having to try to be open-minded to all the different ideas there are out there about crop circles, because knowing which one is true above all the others is almost impossible at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Are crop circles, you mentioned ley lines a while ago, and ley lines, for those that aren't familiar, are sort of these energetic vortexes of these lines that allegedly go around the Earth or across the Earth, and that can sometimes intersect with one another, and at the intersection, there's supposedly some sort of energetic power that happens there, and people make a case for ancient monuments being close to where these lines intersect, and sacred sites all around the world tend to be around these lines. First of all, on these lines, is that an accurate science where these things are can be measured? And if it is, do the crop circles have any correlation with these ley lines?
I mean, there's two types of lines, because in the sort of the clear definition of the ley line, that actually refers to an alignment of sacred sites in the landscape. But then you get energy lines, which is what the dowsers pick up. Now, there are also straight lines in the landscape that sometimes follow the alignments of sacred sites, so it can get confusing. And the dowsers say they can pick up these lines, and that, yes, crop circles are connected with them, whether they're to do with the sacred sites, and crop circles do often cluster around ancient sites, or whether it's to do with the natural energy patterns in the ground. I mean, there is a belief in some that ancient man instinctively knew where these areas of energy were. That's why they placed their stones and their sacred sites and burial mounds on those sites. If, therefore, crop circles are using the same energy or quality to be created, of course, it would then make sense that they would cluster in those areas. But, I mean, of course, the critics would say, well, the whole thing about the lines is if you draw lines between all the sacred sites of the world, in the end, you're bound to get direct lines and straight lines. Is it just the law of averages making you think there are patterns? And yet, there, I think, are some which are more interesting, and absolutely, for some, it's treated as a science, and they do take them very seriously indeed.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about in some of these crop circles? You look at them, and it appears as if some of the circles actually get cut off by another crop field or area of land, where it looks like the tail of some of the circles should continue on, but on that side of the actual circle, the tail just stops. And it almost appears as if they didn't sort of figure out that the tail was going to be as long as it was, and then it had to sort of just stop, which is... Do you know what I'm talking about? How that happens with some of them?
I would say a few. I wouldn't say it happens that often. I mean, you can look at this two ways, because some say, oh, well, so it was made by people and they've gone wrong and they've miscalculated. But on the other hand, you get crop formations which, for instance, have actually covered more than one field, where, one end of the formation is in a different crop and in a different field. And sometimes it's actually gone across the hedgerow and into another field. I can remember one that were three separate fields with a road in the middle, or two roads in the middle. So sometimes you can get ones that actually will spread out, beyond the field. But yeah, I mean, others, it's almost as if it had to appear in that place, and maybe the length of formation that was intended turned out not to fit. But we just don't know what we're dealing with here, and maybe that's how we're interpreting it. But of course, there might be other ways of looking at it, and the cynics will say, well, it's just gone wrong. Interestingly, though, I think if they were all man-made, we would probably see human error more than we do. I mean,
perhaps people don't realize, but if you add them all up, there's around 10,000 formations recorded now, just under maybe, but it's not far off that. And that's an awful lot of stuff. And if they were all man-made, I think we would expect to see mistakes and errors more than we do. And yet, many of them are very precise, very sophisticated, to be sure. And whichever way you look at it, they are not drunk pranks. Because some still try to say, it's made by people and they're falling out of the bar at night and, they've drunk a lot of beer and wine and then they make these things. And all you can say to that is you can't ever have looked at some of these patterns because some of them are so super precise, so huge, so complex that, even if you think people are making them, that's not how it's happening. But the fact so many of them are perfect and don't have mistakes in them, this is what really begins to focus the mind.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Got a couple more minutes left. Andy, can I call you back on Skype? Because your video and audio kind of are cutting out a little bit. And then I want to ask you about some of the other information and research you're into. Is that cool?
That's fine.
Okay, cool. Okay, let me close this out here. And let me call Andy back here. Interesting guy, to say the least. Interesting subject matter in my mind. Let's see if we can get this going here. Mr. Andy Thomas. Okay.
Yeah, I noticed it was cutting out a little bit earlier on.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah, you were cutting out quite a bit, actually. It was as if the internet wasn't working right. And it's kind of doing the same thing now. Are you finding that to be the case on your end?
I noticed it flicker a couple of times, but you've been clear for the most part. I haven't had a problem back the other way. But it could be my router playing up, which is what I had to restart earlier on. I'm not sure. Well, let's keep going and see how it goes.
Okay, awesome. So why do you think it is it's important for people to look at crop circles? A lot of people just they're sort of living their life. They're in debt. They're unhealthy. They're living their life, just doing their thing, and they're not really interested in these types of issues. Why do you think it's important that people should care about the sort of mysterious phenomenon that occurs around the world?
Well, I think if you want to live and just keep your head down and pretend there's nothing interesting going on in the world, you can. I think that's a very dull way to live, and I think a foolish way to live. What we haven't covered today are the many other things that I've written about in the Truth Agenda book and the Conspiracies book, because there are many mysteries in the world and many clear cover-ups and many areas that we just all pretend are not going on. And some of them are very serious. Crop circles on the surface compared to some of them, like, conspiracies about moon landings and Princess Diana and all the rest of it. Some people say, well, crop circles are very tame, aren't they? Why should I be interested? Well, here's why. Because if you say that even one of those formations is not man-made, even one, you've then got to say where it did come from. And that then raises serious issues about what's going on around you. Because if you say that therefore there is an intelligence coming from somewhere else that is in some way intervening with our world and interacting with it, we presumably ought to know rather more about it, because it's clearly very powerful. It might have an opinion on some of what's going on in our world. And the crop circles, you might start off looking at pretty patterns, but what you soon find is you then find that they are leading you into other areas like UFOs. And then you realize strange lights and crop circles go together. You then look at the various theories about UFOs and the clear cover-ups and the clear conspiracies running behind, say, maybe knowledge of aliens and UFOs. And then you begin to realize, well, hang on, if they're not telling us the truth about those things, what else are they not telling us the truth about? And many people that just began, like me, with just questioning these nice patterns in the fields, soon found themselves taken down many deeper areas. And I think that's been the important thing about crop circles. It doesn't leave you just there. It takes most people somewhere else, and you then realize, actually, we're living in a world full of very deep mysteries. we should be aware of them. We should be asking questions. We should never just accept what we're told to believe in the mainstream. There's something big going on here, whether it's going on in the fields or in the skies or behind closed doors in government departments. We should be having the conversations about them, because that's where humanity expands, and it learns not to be closed down all the time. And I'm afraid the mainstream media keeps us stupid. It keeps us closed down for too long. Things like crop circles, they open us up. They make you ask questions. They inspire. And they move people very deeply inside, and then they take you on the journey. So that's why they're important. And I think anybody that just dismisses them simply because they don't see why they're important isn't really understanding the effect that they've had on many people. And that effect has been very big for a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that idea, and I like that's sort of the same how it's been going in my life. Is when you start looking at one particular issue that's going on in the world, like crop circles, or for me, it started out with alternative health. But I've actually been really interested in pyramids and these sacred sites all around the world for a long time. And but it really doesn't matter which one you choose. If you choose one of them, you start realizing that we have just not been told the truth. And if we haven't been told the truth about something like the pyramids or alternative health and natural remedies for things, you start wondering, okay, why are they not telling us the truth about this? Is it possible that they want to continue to propagate pharmaceuticals and sales of pharmaceutical drugs and these types of medications for people and keeping people sick? Is there an agenda here? And then you can just continue on down the road. I mean, like you were just saying, crop circles is sort of one avenue for people to get into, but then you start questioning just about everything else, our view of history, our view of science, and you start unraveling and going down a bunch of different rabbit holes, and you start realizing, wait a second, this world isn't really it doesn't really run the way we have been told it's run, right? It's quite different.
That's right. Well, I think that's completely true. And I think that's the thing, is to not be afraid of that. I think some people are afraid of hearing that the world isn't as they've been told. And it can be unsettling at first before you get used to it. It's like in the film in The Matrix, waking up and realizing you are in the Matrix. But you know, if you can begin to then deal with the implications of realizing that, you know, the world we're in isn't the one we're told we're in, you can begin to then explore it more deeply. And I think it becomes a richer experience, much more positive experience. And certainly I'd rather live in a world of possibility where I can be open-minded to the unknown and all kinds of things than one where basically everything is just what you see and what you read in the papers and, you know, the food you're eating in that minute. You know, I think we're constantly reduced down to that, whereas there's so much more to explore. So personally, for me, yeah, life's far more exciting and opens up a lot more when you do just start to say, I will now look beyond the usual boundaries that are put down in front of me. We're all forced to wear blinkers so we don't see what's going on. We do need to see. And things like crop circles, they're like beacons. They say, oh, look at us. And then you get drawn in, and then you find all the stuff about, we haven't even covered today, biological anomalies inside the plants, the way the plants are laid down. And you say, well, how was that done? How can they be appearing within seconds in front of some people's eyes? What's doing that? And then with the questions you start to ask in those areas, of course, it takes you to some really fascinating places, not only in the world and the people you meet, but within yourself. And I think it's that inner journey, going into yourself to see what you actually really believe. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing. So in a way, whatever makes crop circles is almost irrelevant. It's what you feel about them inside that might be the most important thing of all.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. What are your thoughts on the, like you were just talking about, the way the plants are laid down? Because they all seem to be laying down in a certain formation and a certain specific angle. I mean, I don't know how you would do that. I mean, how is that even possible if it's not? I mean, it almost appears as if there's some sort of stamp that's this massive stamp that comes out of the sky that just comes from vertical and burns into the crops there. But what are your thoughts about how these plants are laid down in these weird angles?
Well, I mean, there are many different kinds of crop circles, and sometimes the lay, as we call it, is more basic, but other times it's very complex and you cannot fathom out which bit went down at which time. And sometimes you get layers. I mean, you can lift up a layer of crop in one direction and find other layers running beneath in, literally this kind of stacked quality. And the way the crop flows together and merges, sometimes you think, well, if that was two guys with two different bits of wood coming together, you can't see how that could possibly have resulted. So, the way the stems are laid flat is something that isn't talked about enough. And that's the thing, you show somebody on a telly smashing a bit of crop down with a bit of wood, but they never then discuss the state of the crop. They never look in detail at that and then compare that to some of the extraordinary flows and the extraordinary, ways that the crop is just sort of going off in different directions down on the ground itself. And of course, you can't see that. When you're just looking at aerial photographs, you don't understand the different sort of aspects to the crop. And then when you look at tests that have been done on the crop itself, there's a lot of evidence that there are mutations occurring to the seed heads. There are sort of, when you get those knuckles, the nodes on wheat and barley, they're often abnormally swollen or elongated. The labs that have looked at this are pretty much of the opinion this is probably heat having been applied to them, probably something like microwaves. But you don't get these effects when you trample down crop with a bit of wood, with your feet, or with rollers. And this has been put to the test now, I think, pretty definitively. So there are changes occurring which suggests there is a process here that perhaps is energetic. It's not purely physical. So when you talk about the idea of a stamp coming down, yeah, there may well be some process which is very quick. It does seem to have sequences to it. And certainly, I mean, if you just take the video we were talking about earlier, which some say is real, some say it's fake, it's interesting, though, that certain bits of the crop formation appear at different times and then join up. And that does back up what many people claim they've seen, that there seem to be sort of stages to it, but it's very quick, all done within seconds, and then they all link up together. And sometimes you can see that on the ground in the way the stems themselves flow, and sometimes you just cannot see that that could possibly have been done in any other way other than some bits going down simultaneously. But you'll only understand that when you look at them in great detail on the ground.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. Has anyone ever done any testing on the actual food that's coming from these crops? Because that would be really interesting to see the wheat or whatever food's been grown on these lands. Has anyone done any testing on that stuff?
It's certainly been considered because, I mean, people obviously eat crop circle plants all the time. I mean, the farmer will come in and he will cut them down and they will recover some of those plants. So we've been eating crop circles collectively for many, many long years. Now, who knows what effect it's having? Some have more specifically tried to make bread from crop circle grain or even beer. And everybody still seems to be standing up at the moment. But in long-term effects, well, we don't know. Yes, I think there should be more tests done on that. Is there a change in the nutritional value, for instance?
Yeah.
And I think these would certainly be questions worth pursuing. I've not yet seen any definitive science in that area. And clearly whatever's going on doesn't seem to be harmful, but it may well be having an effect. Plus, we mentioned the water earlier on. Well, if we got all this underground water running in the areas where the crop circles are appearing, and you do believe, as dowsers do, that water can have its energy field profoundly changed by things like crop circles, well, that water is then flowing around the world. And who knows what it's doing? Maybe it's some mass homeopathic experiment where the water from beneath crop circles is then flowing on out around the world and maybe doing something, hopefully something positive. But we don't know. And again, these are questions that I think should be asked more than they are. But once again, it shows there's a lot of different ways you can look at this phenomenon. And this is where you realize, well, it's not straightforward. But at the same time, there's a lot of exciting possibilities here as to what could be going on.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating subject. I'm just so completely fascinated by it. Do you think we'll ever have answers? Do you think at any point answers will come out?
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, this is something that I think a lot of people have hoped for years. There would be an answer or some revelation that will then make it completely clear. But I'm not sure, because if that isn't the intention, if the intention is the journey and the expansion of consciousness that comes through not knowing what's going on, it may well be that they'll never reveal what's going on, because that would then spoil it. And it could be that we come back in 100, 200 years' time and they'll either still be going on or they will have receded and gone away, and people will look back to these times and think, what was that? And maybe we'll be none the wiser as to what it was, but perhaps it doesn't matter. Because if that's not the agenda of the phenomenon and whatever's making it, although we always want answers because that's the way we are, we're curious as a species, maybe that would spoil it. Maybe that's not the intention of the makers. And so it's meant to be that their origin and their purpose forever remain a mystery, or at least in this period of consciousness. And maybe we're nowhere near ready to accept what's really going on. We like to think we're very advanced as a species, but maybe we've got a way to go before we're ready to fully grasp what all of this means. So, yeah, maybe there will be an answer, but not necessarily in our lifetimes.
Yeah, you wonder, I mean, how ready are we to receive an answer? If there were an answer that was going to come out, I mean, are we ready as a species to receive that? I wonder,
Well, and indeed, would it be the answer we want? Right. What if it's not the answer we want? Maybe if it turns out to be the herald of some huge time of catastrophe, well, maybe it's better not to know. But I don't think so. I mean, in terms of the catastrophe theory, and some do think that's what's going on, I don't think something would go to all that bother to alert us if there wasn't anything we could do about it. So I think that offers hope. It seems to think it's worth waking us up and worth deepening our consciousness, whereas if it was just something that was going to be an unpleasant answer, well, why go to all that trouble? So I think there's a hope there.
What's interesting about the crop circles to me is that it's more of a recent phenomena. Like you look at the Coral Castle down in southern Florida or the Georgia Guidestones, and it's one of those things where this isn't something that was created, or it wasn't something like a structure like the pyramids that were created however long ago you think they are, a couple thousand years, 10,000 years ago. These are all just bizarre circumstances that have happened in our own life. And that to me is really interesting, how it's within our own lifetime.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we've seen, crop circles, I think, do go way, way back before our lifetime. But in terms of the evolution and that real sort of surge of complexity, sure, that has happened in our lifetime. And I would say, and I think a lot of people feel this, it's somehow matching this consciousness evolution that's clearly going on in front of our eyes. There does feel like there's a quickening, some kind of acceleration of that. And there's been many prophecies made for these times which say that we will attain some new way of thinking, some new ability as a species of using collective consciousness. So maybe it's an interactive thing. Maybe we're helping to generate more complexity in the fields. They are also helping us to go more deeply into our consciousness. So it's a kind of a circular thing going on here in every way. And that's an exciting idea. But yeah, I think a lot of people feel they're here for a reason, even if we never know the reason, and that they are part of this general surge towards something new. And I think the internet, the rise of the internet especially, has enabled people to share ideas in a much bigger way and a much faster way than we could ever have envisaged. And I think that's changing human consciousness as well. And there's a good and a bad side to that. But I think, if we can learn to use it for its best abilities and best gifts, it may well be that will change us too. And the crop circles were a part of that. And certainly, the big jump in their complexity chance or not, did seem to occur when the internet was just starting to get going in a big way. So it may well be there is some synchronicity here. There's something interactive going on, and it's all about us growing as a species. And who knows where that will take us? Hopefully somewhere very good.
So what are your, because you were talking a little bit earlier about how crop circles can sort of be almost like a gateway drug, they say, with marijuana, where how it takes people into other drugs. But crop circles obviously was something where you got really interested in it. And then from there, you've written the book called Conspiracies and then The Truth Agenda. What are some of the stuff you talk about in those books, those two newest books of yours?
Well, certainly the Truth Agenda is trying to put together a lot of the other unexplained mysteries. So it looks at things like the circles and pyramids and UFOs and religious apparitions and says, is there a link? What's the linking thread here? And it tries to draw some of those together. And the linking thread, as much as anything, seems to be all of these things draw people to what we were just discussing, this awareness that there seems to be something changing, there's a sudden evolution. And then it looks at why are certain areas covered up. Why is it that things like UFOs are clearly misrepresented to us? And could it be that the authorities know very well that we're in a huge time of shift and change, and those at the top of the occult pyramid don't want us to be aware of these things? Because the last thing they want is us evolving, then getting in their way when all their nice plans for control and surveillance around the world were nearly coming to fruition. So it looks at that, and it looks at this hypothesis that events like 9/11 and various other horrific things that have gone on could well be manipulated or at least used to shut down free speech, to shut down freedom, to cause more surveillance, and actually hold the human race back from attaining its full capabilities. So the Truth Agenda book looks at that, and at the end looks at collective consciousness and how we could use that for the good with positive action as well, because you can't just sit there and think. You need to do two things together. We could turn all of this around. And I'm happy to say the Truth Agenda has had a fantastic response. And the new editions out in the States now, is taking it out further. It keeps getting updated. And the book Conspiracies, well, that's looking more at the hardcore stuff like 9/11, JFK, Princess Diana. But all of these things really matter because what they do is show you that there are powers that really don't want you to know what's going on. They're willing to kill to stop people know what's going on. And although on one level that's somewhat shadowy and a little bit frightening, the more people that know that this is going on, the less able they'll be to keep going and doing those things. And that's the thing. There's no point putting on a blindfold and just pretending stuff like this isn't going on. You have to face it. And the more people that become aware of it, actually, it becomes impossible for these things to keep happening in the future. So by discussing those in those books and trying to pull all the threads together, what you hope you're doing is laying out a new mandate where people can actually say, right, enough of this. I don't want this going on. I'm going to take responsibility for myself and society as a whole. Let's stop this now. And I think we're seeing evidence that that's happening. And when you look at what people do believe and how many people do believe in conspiracies and cover-ups, it's a large amount of the world's population. But you put on the TV, you read the newspapers, you don't see it. And that's where you realize what's being delivered to us in the mainstream is a lie. It's misleading people into thinking we're in a cozy, contained, easy world where nothing terrible happens, when we all know that that's not the case. Well, we hear about the terrible, obvious things like the wars and that, but in terms of the information that would be useful for us to know, that would give us truth and freedom and real free speech, not the fake free speech that we've got. These are areas, I think, the more we get to know what's going on, the more people will genuinely be freed. We've got to keep asking questions, keep pushing the envelope out there, and keep the conversation going. Mm-hmm. And if all crop circles have done is start that conversation, then that's been enough. Mm-hmm. Whatever they are, that in itself is justification enough for them to be there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I was just at the gym this morning, and in our gym, there's a bunch of these huge big TVs, and they have the news and different shows on, but they're all on silent. And apparently there was some shooting allegedly today at UCLA, the college here in California. And you should have seen what they had these children, these kids do. They were walking out with their hands above their heads. They're being searched one by one and being told where to go. And these police officers that look like military guys with their tanks and all their equipment. It was just so fascinating because I just looked at it and I just looked at it for what it was. I looked at the screen and I looked at what was happening, and what I saw was a bunch of guys with what looked like guns and uniforms telling kids where to go. That's what I saw. But what they were telling me was going on was that there was a mass shooting at a college here in California. And I think that now more than ever, people are starting to look at the news and saying, what am I seeing on the screen and what are they telling me? Or what am I seeing on the screen and how does that differ from what they're telling me? Because what I see on the screen is just a bunch of people walking around, a bunch of trucks, guys with guns. But what they're telling me is something completely different than that. And whether or not it actually happened or not, I think we need to start questioning, are these events real? Do they really happen? Is it, and start questioning these stories, like you said, that they're trying to tell us. It's just, starting to question what they're putting on the mainstream media.
I mean, there's often a gulf between the reality of something that's happened and the way it's told in the mainstream, of course. I mean, there are theories out there which say some of the big terror atrocities never happened and the victims were actors and that. I don't tend to go down that line too much. I think it has happened, but I think you can assume some of these events are too big to fake. But that doesn't mean they're not getting used. And how all of these events get used or they're manipulated into being is to create fear. And the more you can keep a population in fear, and you were saying about the images of the soldiers and tanks and the children, I mean, that's very fear-inducing. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, history shows that when we fear, we're much more easily controlled. And that's something we have to try to reach beyond. So if you see fear being stirred up, and if you see something being misrepresented to create even more fear, ask yourselves why. And the Truth Agenda book really explores this especially, which is that fear is the tool by which we give away our freedom. And when you get a big terror atrocity, you find instantly certain liberties have gone. But we all say, oh, well, we need to do that because we need to protect ourselves now. And that's where some people say, well, maybe some of these stories are then exaggerated or made up or whatever so that they can keep their control agenda in place. Mm-hmm. And there's no question fear is used to control us. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. We must be aware. But we mustn't fall into fear. If you're living every day feeling frightened to go out of the door, well, then the fearmongers have won, and we really mustn't do that. Ultimately, I'm an optimist. I do believe that the light, if you wish to call it that, will win. But we do need to shine that light into the shadow, and that's why pretending that stuff like this doesn't go on doesn't help. That helps nobody at the end of the day. We do need to talk about these things. We do need to uncover them and just constantly push the authorities to tell us the truth about what's going on. Because sometimes it's so obvious they're not. But they shouldn't ever be allowed to get away with that. And we need to keep pushing. And maybe someday we'll get somewhere and we'll live in a world that's rather more open and a lot more free.
Yeah, I agree. I'm an optimist as well. Awesome. Thanks, Andy, for spending some time with us today and talking about crop circles. I appreciate that.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
So people can find out what you're up to, upcoming events, seminars, stuff like that at truthagenda.org. Is that right?
That's it. Lots of stuff about my work, some articles up there to read, and you'll find out what I'm getting up to. Yes.
Nice. And do you have a newsletter or Facebook thing where people can follow you there as well?
Yes, if you go on to truthagenda.org, there's a Facebook link and you can join that and find out what's going there. There's also some videos to watch. Some of my talks are up there, some TV interviews. So do have a look. It's all up there on the website.
Nice. That's so cool. So you post frequently, you write new articles, and you're doing this kind of stuff on an ongoing basis, right? So there's always new content for people to look at?
Yes, I mean, there's usually something going on, and particularly over here at the moment, we've got a lot of stuff going on about the European Union and whether or not Britain wants to belong in it. So I've got some interesting thoughts about that up there at the moment. It may not affect you directly, but globally, it could have a knock-on effect. So that's an interesting one as well.
Oh, my goodness. All right. So it's truthagenda.org, right?
That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy, for spending some time today.
Pleasure. Thank you.